Greetings, church. It's Wednesday, so this must be midweek motivation time. And if you're like me, you need some motivation right about now. I have looked forward to and have so enjoyed the motivators that have come before me. I've also been impressed by their technological skills, shooting with various backgrounds and props, interspersing songs and graphics. Just know that with me, there are no bells and whistles. It's enough for me to just record this thing. My name is Anna Billingsley, a longtime member of FUMC and one of the lay leaders. I have thought a lot about what I wanted to say today. Folks, our world has been rocked. As some of you know, I am chief spokesperson and head of crisis communications for the University of Mary Washington. I realize that we're all weary of hearing the term, but this is an unprecedented time. We have a crisis within a crisis, a pandemic along with a wave of anger and anxiety. Oh, and for those of you who believe trouble comes in threes, have you heard that this is predicted to be a highly destructive hurricane season? How do we cope? For Christians, the answer is clear: faith. I want to talk today a little about faith. In my Zoom Sunday school class this past week, and this is a plug for all of you to get connected with the class, someone said she was bringing up the dreaded W word. I had to think for a minute what that might be. What was that? Witnessing. I think for some people, witnessing conjures images of people wearing their religion on their sleeve or being accosted by a stranger who's trying to sell you something. Never mind that what they're selling is eternal life. The approach can sometimes be off-putting. Instead, think of witnesses in a court of law. They are called to stand to testify as to what they saw, heard, and experienced. Nothing more. They don't have to tell you how they felt or what it all means. In the Christian context, we don't have to be theologians and figure out all the answers before we share our own faith journeys. So I'm going to relate today a little of my travel log. In the midst of coronavirus and crusades, I'd like to share some experiences during my 63-year journey. I was 23 and my sister was 21. Our family had been keeping a hospital vigil as my mother lay dying of cancer. We told our dad to go home and take a brief break, so that left the two of us at bedside when my mother drew her last breath. I looked at my sister and said, "Nothing will ever be the same." My girls were young. I had worked a full day, come home and fixed supper, then started bath time, wondering when their dad would ever be home from the office. As they were splashing in the tub water, my phone rang. "Mrs. Billingsley, this is the Fredericksburg Rescue Squad. Your husband has suffered a seizure in his car, and we have him and are on our way to the hospital." I quickly phoned my best friend to come and watch the girls as I dashed to the ER. I said to my friend in passing, "Nothing will ever be the same." I was teaching a class at University of Mary Washington when a fellow faculty member rushed in and said a plane had flown into the Twin Towers. Class quickly disbanded, and I became glued to the TV, watching the horrors of a country under attack. Schools let out early, and when I picked up my girls, I said to them, "Nothing will ever be the same." It's 2020. I'm working from home. I steer clear of public places, even my church, and I visit with friends and family via electronic devices. People around the world are doing the same. Coronavirus has gripped the globe. I say to myself, nothing will ever be the same. True. My mother, a kindergarten teacher who yearned for grandchildren, wasn't around to meet them. or to be present at my wedding for that matter. My husband's seizure led to brain surgery, a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis, and a year-long driving prohibition. We all know the effects of 9/11, fear of things we always took for granted, flying, going to the top of skyscrapers, took root in our souls. As for the impact of COVID-19, the long-term verdict is still out. The immediate effects, though, are that we're staying in or close to our homes. We're participating in church via Facebook or YouTube. We're wearing masks if we venture out. We're having groceries delivered. We're holding meetings via Zoom. And we're trying to wrap our heads around unimaginable death tolls and infection rates. Now we are witnessing protest, most peaceful, but some leading to tear gas and other outcomes about systemic racism in America. As I mentioned previously, this could be viewed as a crisis within a crisis, but it's all a matter of perspective, not diminishing death, illness, and destruction. Maybe this is an opportunity within an opportunity. We're being forced to pause, reflect, mourn, pray, adapt, and appreciate. And in the aftermath of George Floyd's unconscionable death, we're also being called to action. In times of crisis and upheaval, we seem to focus on all that we've lost. Take the social distancing required in this global pandemic. No more gym workouts, movies on the big screen, haircuts, trips that involve flying. Heck, many have lost jobs. At the same time, though, in this age of constant acceleration, think about what we've gained from days of quarantine, other than a few pounds. Less need to drive, greater opportunities to commune with nature, more time to spend with our loved ones and to pursue our passions. When COVID-19's rampage diminishes, I pray that we hang on to these positive values and habits. We've seen good come from both direct disruptions, one health-related, the other societal and cultural. Greater kindness and maybe more open minds, endless donations and thank yous, and words of encouragement to essential workers, first responders, those in need, refreshments for protesters, food or flower deliveries to senior citizens, cards sent, more electronic connections to far-flung family, greater grace extended to people of color. We now have a chance to reinvent and create a better world where we can all work, rest, and play in the new normal. And speaking of the COVID-19 pandemic, a professor at University of Southern California described it as, quote, the biggest disruption of our lives. He added, quote, daily life is far more disrupted by this pandemic than after 9/11 or the beginning of World War II, and anxiety is at levels seen only after Pearl Harbor and the Great Depression. Wired magazine has deemed March 11, 2020 as, quote, the day that changed everything. Think back. It's when March Madness was canceled, Broadway went dark, and the stock market started taking a nosedive. Even so, according to the USC professor, quote, despite the upheaval, our researchers found that Americans have positive views about their relationships and hope for how their lives will proceed after this pandemic ends. Hope for the future. I call that faith. Whether it's a pandemic, a social uprising, a terrorist attack, death of a family member, or diagnosis of an illness, anything that creates a sense that nothing will be the same, Christians can and will persevere. Faith can and will overcome fear. Faith means trusting God no matter what. Suffering is not final. Of course, this belief does not free us from worry. The mind is like a whirling hamster wheel of worry. Stopping it for just a moment to focus on the moment is a healthy act. It's the dewy freshness the morning after a downpour. It's the rainbow after a ferocious storm. Hard things are hard. President Obama had that saying on his desk when he was in the Oval Office. In face of hard things, a virus that is sweeping the globe, an outpouring of outrage after a black man is killed by a white cop, we have a choice: advance or abandon, triumph or trip up, become bitter or become better. Paul said in Romans 5:3-4, we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. Further along in Romans, Paul proclaims, we know that all things work for good, that God works for good for those who love him. Let me start over. We know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purposes. God is watching over us. His desire is to strengthen us, build us up, and bless us. If we want to see those rainbows, we need to trust him during the storm. Notice what Paul advises us to do when, not if, we go through hard times. This is all from 2 Corinthians. Verse 4, comfort others who are going through the same thing. Verse 9, learn to more completely rely on God. In verse 11, be a greater example and encouragement to others. Here is my prayer. When things appear to never be the same, believe it, embrace it, and look to God for a brighter, better tomorrow. I don't usually like viral things like coronavirus and popular social media posts, but I was taken by this poem that has been circulated recently on social media. And it means more now that I know about the young woman who wrote it. Leslie Dwight was 13 years old when she learned that her father, who passed away when she was just a newborn, had actually died by suicide. This tragic revelation taught her the importance of staying resilient during trying times. She said, quote, I think that people are feeling lack of hope now, but they need to remember that hope is still there. And this is her poem. Some of you may have seen it. What if 2020 isn't canceled? What if 2020 is the year we've all been waiting for? A year so uncomfortable, so painful, so scary, so raw, that it finally forces us to grow. A year that screams so loud, finally awakening us from our ignorant slumber. A year we finally accept the need for change. Declare change, work for change, become the change. A year we finally band together instead of pushing each other further apart. 2020 isn't canceled, but rather it's the most important year of all. Good tidings to all of you.